Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Geek Warning. I'm James Huang. I'm here in the studio, otherwise known as the bike shop, with ace mechanic Zach Edwards of the Boulder Gruppetto. Hi, Zach.
Hello.
Also joining me in the virtual studio, way over in Sydney, Australia, is tool hoarder and tech editor extraordinaire, Dave Rome. Dave, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Wasn't used to having such an intro, so thank you for that.
I mean, I can come up with
It's very official.
less appealing one.
That's all good. We'll stick with that one.
We have a whole bunch to talk about in this week's show. I just came back from checking out pretty much seemingly everything and anything at Sea Otter last week. We've got some news on the Wahoo front. We have I would say maybe an intriguing new cross-country mountain bike from Specialized. We have a very curious development in the bicycle service world, at least in the UK. Now we're going to talk about that. And then we're going to talk about Boyd Cycling's new aluminum rim factory in South Carolina. That's pretty intriguing as well. Then we're going to talk about a whole bunch of stuff that I saw at Sea Otter, see what's on our minds, and then maybe a PSA to wrap things up. So yeah, we got a pretty full show in store for you today. What do we want to start with here today? Should we maybe start with the bad news, get that out of the way?
Go.
Well, people who have been paying attention to this maybe have caught wind of the fact that Wahoo Fitness is not really doing great. They were one of the companies who expanded way too much and took on way too much investment money during the pandemic. And they are now super deep in the hole. They actually defaulted on on some of their debt last week. And the hits keep on coming because barely a week after Wahoo defaulted on some of its debt, a U.S. federal judge has now rejected the company's request to halt sales of the Zwift Hub indoor trainer, claiming that it infringed on Wahoo patents. I would imagine Wahoo has a fair bit wrapped up in legal fees on this thing, and I'm not really sure exactly what they were hoping to gain by going up against Zwift. But this kind of feels like it was already kind of seemingly the beginning of the end for Wahoo, but this sure feels like another nail in the coffin. It seems inevitable at this point that Wahoo is going to get bought by someone instead of just disappearing entirely. But what I'm wondering is who would actually buy Wahoo? Not that they're a bad company to buy, but like where does their portfolio best fit into somebody?
It's an interesting question. I guess I obviously I don't have an answer to that, but I guess my question would be, what does the company look like once that does happen? You know, like what areas of Wahoo will remain and what areas of Wahoo are likely to disappear through this,
or get sold off,
split off. Yeah, I mean it's definitely a very big question, but for me, I can't imagine Wahoo with its current portfolio of software and hardware continuing into the future under new ownership. I think they'd really, whoever buys them will really focus back to what their core product was and where their core profitability is. So yeah, I think that's perhaps the bigger question for me. But either way, yeah, I mean it's not great news for them, and definitely feel sorry for everyone that's wrapped up in all this.
I mean, I guess essentially what we're talking about when you mentioned core competencies is, in the case of Wahoo, we're looking at indoor trainers and GPS computers, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I mean, not too long ago, Wahoo bought Speedplay. It went through a bunch of revamp and redesign for those, and the reintroduction of those pedals has, I would say, been decidedly kind of tepid. So I don't know how many people are still using Speedplay pedals anyway, especially not the new generation. But for anyone that buys Wahoo, it seems like you said, Dave, they're going to want them for the indoor trainers and for the GPS computers. And who knows, maybe even those two things get split off from each other. Like the indoor trainer seems to me like the most valuable part, I would guess.
Yeah, I would guess as well, but
I guess I don't know. Maybe
I think
equally the indoor trainer and GPS computers.
Yeah, I think even the indoor trainer market's not quite as lucrative as it was 2 years ago. I feel like a lot of people now own a trainer that is lasting the distance and don't necessarily need to upgrade all the time. And I think we're seeing that through the kind of lukewarm feature additions that the trainer brands are now offering with each new iteration. It's kind of got to a point of, modern smartphone technology where you get a few extra megapixels in the camera and an extra lens, and that's all they can sell you a new phone on. So I think it's a tough business to be in right now. But yeah, it's I think there's certainly a space to watch. I personally don't have any answers, but I don't know, James. Like, do you have any insight or any clues as to what sort of company might take Wahoo on next?
I mean, I've certainly heard rumblings and rumors of who has been talking to Wahoo.
Interesting.
It's unfortunately nothing that I can disclose here, I would say. Certainly nothing confirmed, so I would prefer not to. It'd probably be better not to mention any names.
For sure.
But of all the companies that I've heard who are talking with Wahoo about potentially purchasing them, for sure, they don't want all of Wahoo, no question. If someone buys Wahoo, it's just going to get broken up. And for sure they'll just keep bits and pieces that they need, and then everything else will get sold off. But I mean, I wonder if the computer business could be spun off on its own. I think it probably could be, and ironically, it's where Wahoo started.
Mm-hmm.
That could be a standalone business. The indoor trainer business could be standalone. The pedal thing, I mean, maybe, I don't. Like I said, I don't know how many people are still using SpeedPlay anyway. But it does make me wonder if SpeedPlay were to go away, like how much of an impact would that be? I mean, Zach, you see probably a better cross section of stuff coming through here than we do. Like how many people do you still see using SpeedPlay?
I mean, I definitely see a handful of people using SpeedPlay, but around here, honestly, not that many people do, because the roads around here, we have dirt roads and stuff. And if you've ever ridden SpeedPlay and unclipped your foot and put it down in some dirt, then that's not really
pretty much the end of your ride.
Yeah. So there's honestly not that many people around here that use them, even though like Wahoo has an office here, and you'd think that would kind of influence more people to ride them. But I don't know. It seems like you have like very hardcore SpeedPlay users, and then other people that have maybe tried them or that are just very anti them. So
yeah,
personally, if they disappeared, I wouldn't be that sad.
Around here in Sydney, I mean, we used to have Steve Hogg based in Sydney, the famous bike fitter, and he was a very strong proponent of SpeedPlay. So a lot of people that went through him for bike fitting are on SpeedPlay. We also had like the Australian distributor was based in Sydney. So for me, I do see them. I think there's a few percentage points of the road market here are on them, but that's the old system. That's SpeedPlay, not Wahoo SpeedPlay. And I think Wahoo SpeedPlay, they had a few missteps on introduction, right? They had the bearing issue with their pedals. They had, I guess, maybe some struggle in distribution as well, in terms of getting the product out there and letting its hardcore SpeedPlay fans know that the product's back and under new ownership and what that all means. But I certainly would say that when Wahoo purchased SpeedPlay, they probably had this dream of being the second player in the pedal market, that they could overtake Look as the favored road pedal and not take Shimano's market share, but potentially take over where Look was really strong. And as we all know, SRAM entered that pedal market as well with time, and are arguably doing a much stronger job of it. So
right.
Yeah, so I feel like that whole market heated up around them in a way they didn't anticipate with that acquisition.
Well, big ambitions, and hopefully that doesn't go with a big failure. But yeah, we'll keep an eye on this one. What will seemingly be a much bigger splash, regardless of what we think of the thing. Specialized has a new cross-country mountain bike that is, let's say, hasn't been a very well-kept secret. It's been out on the circuit for quite some time, and a few leaked photos here and there, but people have had a pretty good idea of what this was. Dave, what is this thing exactly?
Yeah, new Epic World Cup. So the Epic is their cross-country race platform, and the Epic World Cup is a dual suspension that replaces their hardtail. Is probably the most Yeah, probably the best way of putting it. But it's it's kind of if anyone has seen the Trek Super Caliber, then you've probably seen the new Specialized Epic World Cup. And it's very, very similar. So it's got a top tube mounted sort of semi-integrated rear shock. The rear travel is actually less than previous Epic full suspension bikes, so it's just 75 millimeters of rear travel. While the front travel is actually bumped up, so it's 110 millimeters of travel on the front. And yeah, it's officially it's replacing Specialized's top end hardtails, but it's also replacing their top end full suspension race S-Works level race bikes as well.
All right, so now what we're going to have is presumably the S-Works Evo, or I guess the Epic Evo range, which is supposedly kind of like a little bit more like almost delving into trail category a little bit with that one.
The term for that is down country.
Oh, I can't do it. Mike Levy, this is your fault. Anyway,
so Mike Levy doesn't even like that category name.
I know,
so
but
funny,
it's
and
his
he's
fault,
to blame.
He invented it.
Yeah.
Anyway, so at one end of the spectrum we have the Epic Evo, which is 120 up front and 110 in the back, I think. And then Specialized is retaining, I think, just one level, like a comp level of the Epic Hardtail. And then now in the middle, we're going to have this Epic World Cup like pseudo hardtail thing.
Yeah.
There's been no announcement or no hints whatsoever what's going to happen to the Evo range, but that's got to be coming soon, surely.
Yeah.
I mean,
there's also one more bike in the range, which is the brain equipped Epic. So the 100 mil travel previous race bike that retains at like a mid-level price point. I'm not going to say it at an entry-level price point because it's definitely not an entry-level price point bike, but it's more like that comp and expert level is where that bike is being repurposed.
I mean, that I feel like the previous version that they still have on their website and is still for sale that you just mentioned, I feel like that will go away as soon as the warehouse full of them is gone. Like they're not going to come out with a new paint job of that.
Yeah, I think
like,
they have
surely.
announced a new new year model of it, but yeah, definitely seems like a carryover until they burn through the stock, or perhaps until maybe even until like the high end sort of pursuit of this Epic World Cup, this new pseudo dual suspension. Perhaps once that the sales of that start to dwindle at the top end, they'll maybe trickle it down.
I mean, I can't remember. I saw I'm sure it was on some forum or something. I saw a rumor that there is of the new World Cup that there's going to be an aluminum version of that, which I think would be freaking rad.
Yeah,
but that would then replace that old carryover model of the current comps and experts and stuff.
Yeah, and that makes perfect sense. And it's in theory a cheaper bike for them to do at a lower end range because it's no longer got that hugely complicated brain shock in it as well. So it is just a simplified race bike now.
Dave, who is this Epic World Cup aimed at?
Cross-country races. I mean, it's realistically, it is just designed to be an all-round race bike now. So I would say, given the amount of travel in it, it's not going to be the best bike for people that really like, I guess, pushing the technical side of racing and really like doing aggressive and ultra rough downhill style cross-country races. But for everyone else, like short track and for XC and for, I guess, faster marathon racing, this is Specialized's answer to that.
Just to be clear, this bike does look extremely similar to the Trek Super Caliber. There is one little distinction. The Trek Super Caliber, that rear shock, it's almost kind of more of a strut. I think Trek actually calls it the ISO strut.
Yeah. Right.
So the front and rear end, I guess both ends of the shock are rigidly attached to the top tube.
Yep.
Whereas on the Epic, it's almost kind of like a mini swing link at the rear end of the shock. So it's very slightly different, but it still looks almost the same.
That, like, their whole marketing around this bike was it's killing the hardtail, which I think is just the stupidest marketing of it. Like, talk about how this suspension, it works really well, how it's different from the Trek. Like, it has a linkage-driven rear shock, right? Like, so that there is different. It's not a structural component of the frame like on the Trek. So, like, talk about that and talk about why it's a good bike. Don't talk about, like, we're killing the hardtail. Like, you guys still make the chisel and epic hardtail, and like a lot of people can't afford full suspensions, or they live somewhere where a hardtail is a great bike. So like,
and a lot of people still like hardtails.
Yeah, hardtails are fun.
Yeah.
Like, instead of just being like, this bike's better than a hardtail, be like, this is why it's a World Cup or World Champs winning level race bike.
Yeah,
which I think they kind of missed the mark there.
Absolutely.
There's some interesting stuff that they talk about with this whole like half gulp, full gulp thing too, right? So Dave, do you want to talk about some of the different shock settings that Specialized is talking about here?
Yeah, so they've ditched the brain technology, the brain being the sort of auto locking suspension where if a large enough force from the wheel occurred, it would basically open up the valving of the shock and let the suspension do its thing. That's gone away. What they've used instead is they've sort of rewound the clock a bit and gone with a shock that has both positive and negative air chambers that can be manually tuned. So the idea there is that if you run no negative air in the negative air spring, then it's actually the shock's basically topped out. So at that point, you're basically on a hardtail that requires a large enough force to get that positive air spring moving. And yeah, by tuning the amount of air that you have in that negative air spring, you can basically start to add in sag into the system. So basically every other suspension bike on the market runs sag, which lets the bike sort of sits in with your body weight and lets the rear wheel follow the contours of the trail. The more negative air you add to that shock, the more sag you'll have with the system. It's still very minimal sag though. So most XC race bikes will run about 20 to 25% sag. So say you've got 100 mil of rear travel, then you're sitting in about roughly 70 to 75% of that travel. Sorry, you've got 70 to 75% of active travel after that. So you're sitting in about 25 mil of it. Specialized by comparison, only running like 5 to 10% sag at most, which is very minimal. So it's still, you can expect this is still going to be a bit more of a rougher ride than most full suspension bikes on the market.
I don't know if either of you two remember this bike, but when I was going over the press materials for this thing, I mean, it does sound like it would be a very fast bike in the right conditions. However, I was also picking up some pretty strong Giant NRS vibes from back in the day.
Yes.
Because that was...
Stand out of the saddle.
Yeah, because that was a bike, that was a dual suspension bike that Giant introduced in the like early 2000s, I think, maybe.
That's so cool.
And I had two of them, actually.
I had one.
And it was a full suspension bike that was designed to be run fully topped out.
Yeah.
And it also, ironically, had a RockShox SID rear shock with independently tunable positive and negative chambers.
Yep.
And there were just a lot of strong vibes about that here. I'm not saying it's the same bike, but it's maybe just yet another example of, kind of what is old is new again at some point.
Yep. History repeats itself. But yeah,
coming full circle here.
Absolutely. And yeah, so that's the thing. Like, there's not a lot brand new about this bike. It's just, modern technology. It means you've got a frame that's under 1,800 grams now, and modern geometry as well is sort of what really separates this from the old tech. But yeah, it's certainly there's I would say the brain was more innovative in that sense than what this shock is doing.
Oh yeah, but the brain was, I feel like, had its own issues. I would say. But yes. I'd be super curious to ride this bike. Like, I have a Super Caliber with the 120 fork, so it's kind of in the similar geo as the new one is. Like the Super Caliber with the 100 mil fork is a bit outdated, I would say. But like the Super Caliber uses 60 mil travel, so a bit less, and you set it up with sag. And in my opinion, like, it absolutely rips. And like, even riding it on really dumb like enduro trails, I don't feel like I wish I had more rear travel. Like, it just absolutely rips. So I'd be really curious to ride this one with like slightly different theory behind how the suspension works, but aesthetically a very similar bike. Like, it'd be, super interesting just to like a back-to-back.
Have you taken that Super Cal to the left hand?
Oh yeah.
As soon as you said enduro style trails, I'm like, you've taken that to the left hand, haven't you?
Yeah, it's super fun over there on XC bike.
So question on this, Specialized made some statements around that the hardtail is dead. When Trek released their Super Caliber, they somewhat made a similar marketing pitch. and they removed their top end lightweight weight weenie hardtail from the range in the process. Do we think the hardtail's dead?
I don't think so.
I mean, it's
for a variety of reasons.
I feel like the gravel bike will become the hardtail, right? Like you'll have flat bar gravel bikes with 29er by 2.2 tires. Like it still exists.
Yeah.
But I mean, at like the World Cup level, I don't really think so, except on very, very particular courses. Like for the most part, a full suspension is always going to be faster.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean hardtails are dead. Like they're still, like James said, super fun bikes. Like I have a hardtail as well. And every time I ride it, I'm like, wow, this is really dumb, but also like really fun. And it puts a smile on my face.
Yeah. It's dumb, but sort of in an irresponsibly fun way.
Yeah. And I also think like, I mean, this is a whole other topic, but I think a hardtail too, like makes people better mountain bikers. Like you actually have
100%.
to learn line choice and like how to ride smoothly instead of just monster trucking through everything. So I think there is a place for the hardtail.
Yeah.
But
I'm really intrigued with this idea or this rumor that you heard, Zach, about there being an aluminum Epic World Cup version.
I mean, this could just be stuff on the internet.
It could be, but I still love the idea of it because, as you mentioned, hardtails for sure are a great way to learn good technique in mountain biking, and they're obviously a lot more affordable than full suspension anything. But if Specialized were to come out with an aluminum version of this thing, that would presumably be certainly not inexpensive, but a lot more affordable than a carbon fiber one.
Basically be a chisel with a rear shock.
Right. Like XC racing happens at all levels. Like not everyone's racing UCI races and needs the $15,000 model, right? Like an aluminum one of these would be fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it'd be basically like an aluminum hardtail with a safety net.
Yeah. Yeah. I would very seriously consider buying one of those. I mean, I tried to buy a chisel myself, which didn't work out after trying for 18 months or something to get one, but it's I mean, a chisel with a rear shock is.
I had a chisel and it was so
me.
sweet. Like chisel was one of like I had it a couple years ago and it was so rad. Like crazy light, rode really well, did all the things a bike should do.
Yep. So I mean that's definitely a bike I'm excited for if it exists and if Specialized is planning it, then that would be a huge seller.
I think the interesting thing too will be this bike, the Epic one, was very much compared to how it looked like the Super Caliber for the last however many months since photos of it have been out.
Mm-hmm.
But Trek also released a video with their XC team with blurred out bikes this spring. So I very much look forward to see what their answer to it is. I think that will be a really interesting XC bike battle.
I'm mostly just excited that there's just so much stuff going on in the XC world right now between like the bikes are rad and getting so much more capable and just so much better in general. The riding is rad. The racing is rad. The courses are super good. Like the spectating is really good. Just like XC's on fire again. It's good.
I have reservations about how Specialized and Trek have seemingly gone with less travel while the courses are seemingly getting way more technical and way more trail-like. And I think that's, for me, that'll be the most interesting thing moving forward is which direction do bikes go? Like Scott went the other way, right? Scott are basically racing their race bike's almost like a mini trail bike. It's like I guess it's the closest competitor would be like the Specialized Epic Evo. So for me that's probably the most interesting thing is there's this divide between a bike that effectively imitates a hardtail and then a bike that imitates a trail bike, and which one's going to be the fastest option.
Yeah, I was going to say, because you're talking about travel, I would venture to guess the new Trek will be longer travel because if you look at what the World Cup team is riding, they're all riding 120 forks instead of 100 or 110.
Yeah.
So,
well, in any event, I have already put in a request to Specialized to send over a Epic World Cup test bike for review. So yeah, hopefully that shows up soon, and hopefully this last lingering bits of winter here in Colorado just are finally gone. Because I'd like to go ride that thing and do a proper review on it, and we'll see how it goes. All right, next bit of news. Ronan, I think, came up with this one, or maybe it was it Ronan who came up with the Bike EU service center thing?
Yeah, I'd say it was bikeeu.com that came up with it.
Well, I know, but who found it, Dave? Was it you?
It was Ronan.
Okay. So next piece of news is something that Ronan actually stumbled upon. There was an article written in Bike Europe, as a trade magazine, talking about how Quick Fit, a big servicing and repair center, I guess, chain in the UK for automobiles, they've got over 600 locations. They are now diversifying into the bike market, but predominantly looking at e-bikes. That's really interesting because I think we've all noticed for quite a long time at this point that automotive companies clearly have a very, very big interest in the e-bike, or I should say kind of like the whole micromobility trend in general, or that whole world. We see a whole bunch of automotive companies who are involved in that space already, either with their own brands or kind of like little subdivisions of the company that have connections to the parent brand. And this seems like sort of just like another step in that direction because I don't know, if you're a mainstream customer who doesn't really ride bikes necessarily, but has an e-bike for transportation, this sort of scenario, I would argue, would almost make more sense to that person than going to a bike shop.
Yeah, I mean it's definitely worrying for the bike shops, but yeah, certainly when you're talking about e-bikes that are getting to a weight that are no longer suitable for lifting up into a traditional repair stand, and you're talking about technology that has more in common with a modern automobile than it does with a traditional bicycle. I mean, for me, it makes perfect sense that, especially in the cargo bike space, that they'd be going with the people that are already trained in motors and electronics, versus trying to train up a bicycle dealer network to do the same overlapping role.
Yeah, speaking of kind of the infrastructure in bike shops as far as dealing with, for sure, e-cargo bikes, a lot of shops, well, I guess in the EU in particular, there are pretty firm restrictions on how heavy a thing you're allowed to lift. And that's one of the reasons why you're seeing a lot of these kind of motorized or assisted work stands, like from Park Tool and EBT, companies like that.
Every major cycling tool company now offers an assisted work stand. With the exception of Feedback Sports, who don't do like shop style work stands. They just do portable ones. But anyone that does a shop style work stand now actually has a electric or otherwise assisted work stand.
Yeah, and all of those things are awfully expensive. And bicycle shops oftentimes just don't really have the spare cash to invest in something like that. They certainly don't often have the room to deal with a bunch of cargo bikes and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So it'll be really curious to see what happens here.
Yeah, I mean, to expand on what I was saying, where automotive service shops might be better equipped. I mean, a perfect example is that Bosch, their first generation e-bike motor was actually a repurposed power steering unit from, I believe it was a Mercedes-Benz, might have been BMW, but that's, and that product has basically just been reiterated from there. So I mean, that's technology that the mechanics in the automotive world probably deal with all the time. Likewise, they're going through training for how to handle high-powered lithium-ion and large-capacity lithium-ion batteries for the EV market. Once again, they're better equipped for that. I know, for example, Porsche locally in Australia, they have I believe it's called like a drenching bay or something like that. So if they have a battery issue in a car and they can't access the battery in time, it's obviously a fire risk. They basically drive the car into a bay and it drops a huge amount of water. It basically submerges the entire car to contain the battery risk. I mean, obviously the ideal is to never need that, but it exists, right? And these service centers are equipped for that. Whereas bicycle service centers, I know they're encouraged to have like sandboxes and that type of thing in case of battery fault and failure. But it's, if that battery is integrated deeply into the frame, or if it's in an e-cargo bike where it might not be super accessible, some of these bike shops aren't necessarily equipped to handle that from a safety point of view. So I think, moving forward, while it's perhaps not the best news for the bicycle industry, it does make sense that some of these automotive companies are getting into the space.
Well, I definitely don't see a sandbox here in Zach's shop.
Nope. And it almost feels like there needs to be like some sort of hybrid, like specialty e-bike shop, right? Like,
I mean, there are those here, at least.
Because the car mechanics, they have to do all the training to work on the bicycle portion of it, right? Like the brakes and the shifting and all of that. Or like otherwise you have a bike mechanic learning how to do all the electronic stuff. It's like you need someone that's an expert in all of it. Like in most shops don't have the capacity to like specialize and train in that kind of thing. Like they're too busy with everyone's flat tires and general tune-ups and trying to sell bikes and just like stay alive in general, right?
Yep.
Like let alone, I mean, I think like some shops have been able to transfer and do e-bike stuff really well, but I don't think it's right to expect every bike shop to do that at the current stage of things.
No. And I foresee the future being like e-bike specialist individuals that are specialists in e-bike servicing as part of larger stores. So you might have a bike shop that has 10 mechanics and one or two of them might be really proficient in motor repairs and perhaps battery refurb and that kind of thing. But right now that's just not a skill set that the bike industry has had to have. So I think there's going to be a gap in skill sets for the foreseeable future until the demand really brings that sort of knowledge base in.
Well, this is definitely going to be another trend that we're going to be keeping a close eye on because it certainly has potentially huge ramifications for the cycling industry, I guess, at least on the service and maintenance side of things. So, we'll keep an eye on this. Last bit of news before we move on to Sea Otter stuff. Boyd Cycling is kind of a smaller wheel brand based in South Carolina. They've announced a new factory really close to its Greenville, South Carolina headquarters called Olive Manufacturing Group, abbreviation OMG. But OMG it's named after the daughter of Boyd Cycling founders Boyd and Nicole Johnson, and they are going to be making rims in the U.S., aluminum rims, I should say. The extrusions are going to be formed elsewhere, but this facility is going to be rolling and joining and doing machining and anodizing, that sort of thing. It's kind of a big deal because there's just not a whole lot of aluminum rim manufacturing in the United States. They've already talked about, Boyd and Nicole have already talked about how I guess some other companies have already talked to them about making rims for them as well. And I don't think this is, I don't think this was a move to kind of like cut costs or anything like that. If anything, I would imagine this took quite a bit of investment. But it's part of a bigger trend that we've been seeing, particularly in the last 2 years, of companies onshoring production, essentially just so they can have much better control of their processes. Because I think everyone was disrupted pretty badly in the last couple of years, and having your manufacturing be under the same roof and at the very least be a lot closer to where you're doing everything makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, absolutely. You're not having to carry a year's worth of or 2 years worth of stock. You can sort of be a bit more fluid in how you're producing stock and not having to be invested so much in that regard. Rather, you're invested in, I guess, in the staffing and manufacturing of things. I'd also say, I'd imagine that rim manufacturing is inherently expensive from a freight point of view because you're basically shipping large hollow hoops around the world. With a lot of air in between. So I would imagine that that's probably a factor as well. That there's probably some efficiencies to be had by not having to ship boxes of rims from Asia across the US.
Yeah, I mean, straight extrusions certainly take up a lot less room, that's for sure.
Yeah. So, but yeah, it's definitely it's a trend we definitely like. And yeah, I think it's good on Boyd for making that step.
Yeah, and so Boyd is already going to have a couple of models that are going to use the rims that they are producing in-house. I think it's the Altamont and the Bracken, road and a mountain version. And I would imagine certainly they're going to ideally hope to produce all of their aluminum rims in-house. Again, like I said, they're going to be presumably making aluminum rims for other brands as well. So we'll see what's going on there. But yeah, I think this is a cool development. So good on you, Boyd. Good on you, Boyd and Nicole. And Olive, although, yeah, she's 10 and maybe doesn't have a whole lot of say in the company just yet. Yeah. And just to be clear, Boyd is not the first company to be producing aluminum rims in the U.S. We've also had Velocity, who had been doing it for quite a long time. We think that they're still doing it. And then Astral Cycling, which is sort of an offshoot of Rolf Prima. They were making their own aluminum rims for a while as well. And I think they're still at it because there was some association there with White Industries that kind of escapes me off the top of my head. But anyway, kind of a neat development. It's fun to see this happening over here.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Good trend.
All right. Shall we move on to Sea Otter?
Well, James, you were at the show. I was back in Australia watching coverage of the show remotely. what did you see? I mean, it's what, you're there for 3 days?
Yeah, the show went for 4 days in total, but I only stayed for 3 full days. I had to get back home at some point. But Sea Otter, certainly with the demise of Interbike, Sea Otter basically took over the reins as being the premier trade show in the U.S. Kind of unique because it's also open to consumers, just whoever wants to go. So that's a pretty neat aspect. So as a result of that, a lot of the new stuff, most of the new stuff that you see there is also available to consumers right then and there. It's not like they're showing a bunch of like embargoed stuff that they don't want like non-media, non-industry people to see, which is cool. But yeah, I mean, XC mountain biking is definitely hot right now, no question. There was an awful lot of that stuff to be seen over there. A handful of new bikes. If they were not being introduced there, they were at least kind of being shown and showcased there. Gravel's still really hot. Definitely a handful of new gravel bikes that were there. One thing that I thought was really cool, though, is while we generally see a lot of attention at the very high end of the market, there was also a lot of attention at kind of the lower end of the market.
Like, that's cool.
That new Shimano Q stuff.
Yep.
The Sea Otter was the first time I'd been able to check out that stuff in person, and it looks fantastic. And then Microshift was there. They've been pretty busy. And then Box Components was there as well. I didn't have a chance to make it to their booth, but it's really cool to see a bunch of kind of different brands playing in that space now. And
TRP as well? Or are they a little bit more high end with their initiatives?
TRP was concentrating on their new 12-speed group set. It was definitely higher end, kind of aiming more at the kind of SRAMs and Shimanos of the world. But that group set is less expensive, I guess, feature for feature than kind of like what you'd see from SRAM or Shimano. And that stuff honestly looks great. It's, again, certainly more affordable. I actually have a group set from TRP inbound as well, so hopefully we'll have a review of that shortly.
You're going to have just mechanical cables everywhere if you're with all the drivetrains you're looking to test.
Yeah, it's a good, and well, it's a good thing I have all these derailleur cables to use because like I don't use them for brake lines anymore. So sorry, that was a nod to my recent Superstrata review. So if you don't get the joke, you should check out that review on escapecollective.cc. Anyway,
you mentioned Microshift. That one is always interesting to me because they're just such a high value sort of feature packed brand. So I'd previously used the Advent X, which is sort of their top end. I think it's 10-speed group set, but it's got it's a 10-speed group, but with the range, I guess you more associate with a 12-speed mountain bike group set. So it's 11 to 48 tooth cassette.
Big gaps.
Yeah, big gaps, but very robust and just really some nice high-end features for not a lot of money. They've updated the Advent X rear derailleur, which is quite interesting to see. So they've soon enough you'll be able to buy that rear derailleur, which has a shorter cage to it, which improves ground clearance. In theory, probably makes it a bit stronger, less likely to get picked up by sticks and that kind of thing. And the geometry of the cage is also different, so it now sits more forward of the cassette, so you'll get better chain wrap, and in theory, you should get better shifting from it as well. So the little tweaks like that, and the coolest part is it's still the same price, which is I think it's like a $80 derailleur. It might be a little less than that. I like these things. I like to see.
I do too.
Yeah. I like to see the entry level stuff just get better just because they can make it better.
What's also pretty cool too, I think, is, in some ways, some of these lower cost options are, you could argue that it's kind of like stepping back in time sometimes as far as shifting performance goes. But these companies have also been really good about making their inexpensive components compatible with nicer stuff, at least in terms of like cassette spacing and stuff like that. So that certainly opens the door to tricks that all three of us have used back in the day, as far as maybe using kind of an off-brand or different derailleur and shifter, but pairing that to like a name brand cassette and chain. Like if you were to take a Microshift setup and then use an actual Shimano chain cassette, I suspect the shifting would actually probably be pretty good.
Yeah. Yeah. And like Microshift themselves sort of, it's very purposeful by design. They don't offer their own chain, for example. They just tell you to use whatever 10-speed chain you want. So
right.
It's, I think it's I like this kind of system. Like Microshift basically is selling a cassette, derailleur, and shifter for the Advent X, and then everything else is up to you. So it's I think it's quite unique, and I'd say TRP are kind of taking a similar path in that they're not making their own chains. They're just saying KMC is what we equip, but if you've got another chain you want to use and it's the right speed, then go ahead.
Yeah, and they're licensing chainring tooth technology from someone else too. I think they're using MRP chain rings essentially. So they didn't even bother with that. They're just licensing that from someone else, or I guess having someone else make the chain rings for them. But yeah, fun to see a lot more options here. Like it'd be nice to see that on the roadside too, although that would be harder to do just given the difficulties of integrated controls and all the patents and stuff like that.
Yeah, for sure. So we're seeing plenty of good things in the low end and affordable drivetrain space. Perhaps at the opposite end of things, James, you've got written here the rise of good-looking e-mountain bikes.
Yeah, I mean, there was a lot of discussion of e-mountain bikes at Sea Otter for sure. And I know certainly in the US, e-mountain bikes are very polarizing. We don't have nearly the same level of trail access for e-mountain bikes as a lot of other places do. There's just a lot of different attitudes about e-mountain bikes here. Like it's just very, very polarizing, to put it mildly. But the industry definitely sees e-mountain bikes as the way forward. There's a lot of talk right now as far as like they're so popular and they are so overwhelming the sales of push bikes that there a lot of companies are having discussions as far as like what do non-powered mountain bikes look like in the next 5-10 years or whatever. Like what do those segments look like? It's almost sort of analogous to kind of like the automatic versus manual transmission car. It's like the enthusiasts maybe want manual transmission cars, but the market in general predominantly wants automatic. So why bother to devote resources to the smaller segment of the market? I mean, that's maybe the subject of a different show, but as far as that Sea Otter goes, one of the things that I saw, and this is sort of an intersection with the kind of rise of cross-country stuff that we were talking about earlier, there's an awful lot of really good-looking e-mountain bikes right now that are so well integrated that you really, really almost can't tell that they're e-bikes at first, even second glance. So you've got to look at them pretty closely now, like especially with the rise in popularity of that new TQ motor system. That drive unit is so small and the battery really tucks in nicely into a kind of like a modestly oversized top tube, modestly oversized down tube. And then the control unit is just kind of like this little screen on the front of the top tube. It's very discreet. They're quiet. They're still really expensive, but there were an awful lot of them out there. And I have to admit, especially given one trail network in particular that we have here near us here in Boulder, I've really been interested in the idea of getting an e-mountain bike just because it's almost like having your own lift just kind of underneath you, and you can just shuttle so many more laps. And I kind of wonder if it would just make you a better rider in a lot of ways.
I have an opposing theory.
Oh, what is that, Zach?
The last, 5 or so years, the mountain bike push was enduro bikes, right? So everyone got these big 160 mil travel bikes that weighed 30 plus pounds, horrendous to pedal. And most people, like your trails you're talking about, are kind of an outlier, but most people's trails, you don't need that bike.
No, a lot of people are overbiked these days.
So they're like, wow, this is really slow to pedal. And then instead of going like, maybe let's get less travel and get a fast XC bike, you get a motor on the big heavy bike and make it a bigger and heavier bike. Like, just ride an XC bike.
Like a hardtail, like you do at Left Hand.
Yeah, or a full suspension XC bike. Like, I don't know. I know there are some trails that an XC bike is not fun to ride on. But like for the most part, it's just as fast as a e-bike. But like you're still pedaling, and then it's more fun on the way down because you're like bouncing around and it's a bit scary.
Yeah.
Instead of just like monster trucking this 40-pound bike down a trail.
I mean, I tend to agree with you for the most part, Zach, but
I think there is a use case scenario for e-mountain bikes.
There is definitely a use case.
I feel like the industry-wide push of it seems to be overblown a bit.
Well, I don't know if it's so much. I don't even know if we can so much call it. Well, I mean, we can kind of call it an industry push, but in this case, I feel like it very much has been dictated by what people are buying, particularly in Europe. I mean, e-mountain bikes surpassed the sales of regular mountain bikes in Europe a long time ago. And I don't know if it's necessarily because bike companies are kind of like pushing them, so to speak.
But they push the enduro bike that sucks to pedal uphill.
Yeah, but I mean,
so that's the next progressive step.
Yeah, but do you honestly think the bike industry is that prescient to think that far ahead? I mean, they can't even get a bottom bracket right.
No, I don't think that. I think that like they pushed this big enduro bike because it was a new sales category, and like let's sell all these enduro bikes because that's what's the rage. There's Enduro World Series and all this stuff, and then people are like, oh wow, these are really slow to pedal uphill. How do we make it faster? And like then they want a motor to it, right?
I think you're pretty spot on with how the masses ended up on 160 mil travel e-bikes, and for me that's absolutely the use cases. I want an enduro bike. I want a 160, 170 mil travel bike for local Sydney trails. There's a lot of trails here that are too rough and too technical for a 110, 120 mil travel bike. You can ride them, but I mean, there's not a lot of room for error with that style of bike. And yeah, at the same time, I don't want to be pedaling a 160 mil travel bike up our steep hills. So in that sense, I completely agree with what you're saying in that how the industry got here. But I would say that the use case is still very much there for a lot of people to have a 160 mil travel bike.
I would rather see like a 130, 140, very pedalable, but also very capable bike.
Well, I was just going to see, I wonder if what we're going to eventually settle on, in addition to e-bikes at this point, but if we're going to settle on a single category for non-powered bikes, it really does seem like almost the perfect scenario would be kind of shorter travel, 120, 130 millimeter bikes, somewhere around there, that also have frame geometry that are somewhat similar to kind of longer travel bikes. Because a lot of times these longer travel bikes, what people really, really like about them is, I mean, yes, you have more travel, they're more forgiving in that sense, but oftentimes they're also slacker and more stable in their handling. They're more forgiving going downhill. They kind of feel safer to ride. And I wonder if we might just see sort of a melding of those two features into a bike that's a little bit lighter and easier to pedal.
Yep. I've also seen some people argue that more suspension travel is not a negative for climbing. I don't agree with this, but the argument is that it's weight related and it's rolling resistance related. So if you can get a 160 mil travel bike that's competitive in weight to say a 140 mil travel bike, and that doesn't have 1.5 kilo tires with enormous amount of rolling resistance, that you actually have a fairly efficient pedaling bike that is still capable of ripping downhill. Kind of like I guess an enduro World Series race bike, I guess is what you'd probably liken it to. And I've seen that argument that you can kind of have the best of both worlds. But I mean, there's always a compromise. There's always a tipping point. So now I'm going off on a tangent.
Speaking of tangents, where's Kaylee? Kaylee is off this week, by the way. He's busy with another meeting while we're recording this, so just FYI.
Yeah. Speaking of lightweight things, though, Zach, you sent me over Instagram. You spotted some new zip wheels on a cross country race bike.
What did I send you? Yeah, there's a few of the guys at Sea Otter racing the XC race. There were some new looking zip wheels out there. But they were not their moto wheels.
So can you explain what the moto wheel is?
The moto wheel is a single wall carbon rim that's designed to flex and made for more of the trail enduro segment. Mm-hmm. They're not particularly light. They seem to not catch on particularly well.
Yep, and they do a gravel version now as well.
It was a hard concept to really grasp for some people. Or I guess
like all of the features and selling points of that wheel were like the same thing as an aluminum rim. So that was what always confused me on that product. But at Sea Otter, it looked like a new XC wheel. It was very low profile, probably not single wall, probably very light, probably pretty modern and like 30 mil internal, I would assume, or like to see.
Yeah. So talk about that flex. I mean, it's ankling, I guess, at the spoke nipple is probably the type of flex that Zipper are trying to achieve here, where it's not necessarily like your general compliance that people think of a wheel, where it sort of compress. The anklings.
It was like it was like tuned
It's
rim
supposed
twisting.
to flex side to side almost.
Yeah, it's meant to almost follow the contour of the tire. So when you're cornering, the rim's meant to better align the tire. Is sort of the goal with that wheel. But whether that offers enough of an appreciable difference is questionable, and whether that's worth the weight penalty that seems to come with these wheels is also one that's yet to be answered. But yeah, I think it is interesting to see Zip enter the space. It's not surprising. I mean, they've got the same technology available in the Explore gravel range now, so it makes sense that they'd fill that gap. But it will be interesting to see what sort of weight they hit with these wheels.
Yeah, I would say these as not like, if I were to guess what they're making, I wouldn't think that it's also kind of following that same theory as the Moto wheels. I would think this is like, here's an XC race wheel. It is as light as we could possibly make it, and it's in the top whatever 3 wheel sets on the market in terms of that weight.
I mean, at this point, if Zip is going to compete on weight, they've got some pretty heady competition at this point.
Yeah.
Like those new Bontrager, I can't remember what they're called
The
now.
RSL.
Yeah, those are what, like
Sub
1250 or something.
Yeah, they're sub 13.
Yeah, and Roval have a wheel
with
around that
tape
weight
and
as
everything.
well. Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, the competition in that space is really, really hot at the moment. So if Zip is going to compete on weight, these things are going to have to be super, super light. So,
And also, I would say like equally as durable. Like both the Bontrager and the Rovals use DT hubs, and I mean that's always kind of been Zip's weakest point historically. So I would like to see them not just have this crazy light wheel set, but also like have a hub that actually works really well.
Yeah, but either way, I mean, whatever these turn out to be, you know, if their sponsored pros are already using them right now, and presumably maybe have been for a little while, I would have to guess that these are going to come out at some point this season.
Yeah, because these, like, they had decals on them and everything.
Yeah,
they
were
weren't just
done.
like, we're trying to hide these, but people are riding them. These have Zip logos on them.
Yeah. I'm going to speculate that it is using the Moto Inkling Flex technology, and that they're not going after the weight wars, and that they're going to make a claim that a little bit of extra weight comes with that benefit, and they'll sell us on all of that.
Yeah, because they've got to have something to either set them apart if they can't go head to head on weight.
But I also think, though, like, so if you're looking at it like, okay, Zip has a big market with traditional roadies and gravel people.
Mm-hmm.
Like an XC is maybe this new thing. Like the traditional Zip customer is getting an XC bike for the first time. They're going to be like, ooh, I could get Zip wheels, rather than being like, that's why they're going to buy them. Not necessarily because, they flex when you ride the trail this way and the tire does this. Like, people don't care about that, whether it actually works or not. Like, most people, they're buying Zips because it says Zip.
It says Zip on it.
Yeah. Yep.
I mean,
fair.
Either way, we'll find out soon.
Yeah.
Dave, there were some cool tools, I will have to say, that were there as well.
Oh, yes.
And every time I saw a tool, I kept thinking about you, how much you would have loved to just stand
James.
there and kind of caress them in person. But I have to say, like, I almost wonder if we can singularly credit you with the rise of some of this kind of high-end tool trend, like kind of like the fashion of tools now. Like Wheels Manufacturing, they actually had they're going to start launching like an artist series of various tools that they have. They're going to limit them to runs of 20 only. They're going to be sold certainly at a premium. And you know, that, like, they're just fancy tools. Like, they function exactly the same as the regular, like, headset and bearing presses and that sort of thing, but they have fancy anodizing that's not going to be offered anywhere else. So that's purely just an aesthetic thing, kind of like an exclusivity thing. That was kind of neat, but what I thought was actually much more interesting was this tool from I think it's a Swiss brand, Milk It, previously known for kind of like these funky tubeless valve stems and sealant and a couple of other tubeless related things. But they have this tool called the Hassel Off tool, the HASLEL''OFF. Very clever name. But it's basically built around one of your favorite little multi-tools, Dave, the Day Saver.
Yeah.
And it also bundles with it the what is it? The Essentials 5? Is that what the little tire lever thing is called?
Yeah. Or Co-working 5, maybe. Yeah.
Co-working 5, that's what it is. But it's tiny. It's this tiny little multi-tool that packs in virtually every feature that you could want, including a chain breaker, like a proper chain breaker, into this little like pretty much weatherproof, almost like I would almost say it was like an old school like cigarette case sort of size thing. But it's essentially designed to mount to either like your dedicated tool mount on a frame or in between a bottle cage and your frame. Easy access. Also has this extra little strap mount if you want to put a tube on there. It's pretty neat. It has like tubeless plugs and all this other stuff. It's a little bit expensive. It's 99 euros, but the fact that it also includes that day saver and co-working setup is actually makes it kind of a pretty good deal.
Yeah, and that day saver, like those two day saver tools, like the Essential 8, I think it's called, and then the co-working 5, which are kind of like your Allen key set, and then the chain breaker tool. I think they're like 75 euro together. So to get a plug kit and a holder and everything else for that extra 25 euro doesn't sound like bad value to me. So yeah, it's I think it's interesting that Milkit's offering so much for that price point. I'd say kind of makes me question the logic there of day saver versus Milkit and yeah, how those two companies are operating. But does look intriguing.
It does, for sure.
Can I push back a little bit? You on the colored tools. I would argue that probably Toolbox Wars on Instagram are more responsible for the
fair. Okay, fine.
For the trend of colored limited edition tools. That's more their shtick. I would probably just say I'm perhaps more responsible for people buying 10 sets of Allen keys.
I will just say that when I was talking to the folks at Wheels Manufacturing, I will point out that the person I was talking to explicitly said, we love Dave Rome.
Oh, thanks, guys. Yeah, good
so
tool
I
sets,
think there is
actually.
some credit there.
Yeah,
headed your way, or
I
blame.
feel like
or
most of the
however you
credit
look
there
at it.
should be towards Abby. Like Abby started making really nice bike tools, and then bike mechanics, including Dave and myself and you, all started buying Abby and other high quality tools instead of the standard Park or Pedro's or whatever bicycle specific tool.
Yeah,
and I think that has made all of those other companies kind of have to step their game up.
Yeah. So yeah, I think there's a lot of factors there, but certainly I cannot take responsibility for limited edition colors of tools. That's definitely not me. So
okay, fine.
Other things I saw, James, did you get your hands on the Project 321 center lock hubs?
I did. This is an interesting one because you've long had these two ways of mounting disc brake rotors to hubs. You have the kind of more traditional 6-bolt method where you just use 6 M5 bolts to stick the rotor onto the hub. And then you have center lock, which was the system Shimano introduced however many years ago, or where you have this splined interface where you just sort of slide the rotor on and then there's a single lock ring. A lot of rotors that people like to run, however, aren't offered in center lock. And then there are a lot of hubs that, some of them are only offered in center lock, but the whole center lock system it does just give you a lot of flexibility. Like you can always run a 6-bolt on a center lock hub, but you can't run a center lock rotor on a 6-bolt hub. So a lot of companies are going to center lock just because it gives you the most flexibility. Project 321, they were a company that was based here in the US. They got bought out by a Canadian, I don't know if it's just a single person or another company, but anyway, they've since relocated to Canada. They have a 3rd generation hub now, which looks great. Adjustable preload, different driver design, so on and so forth. Still uses these magnetic pawls. It's kind of neat. But the thing that people were talking about was this new center lock adapter that they have. So usually with a center lock adapter, you have sort of like this splined kind of ring that just slips onto the hub. And then they usually have sort of, some way like six little posts or whatever to secure the rotor. And then you have the lock ring that goes on as usual. But what Project 321 has done is pretty different. They have an adapter that it's a 2-piece adapter. It has a stainless steel part that kind of snaps around the base of the splines. And then you have an aluminum part that kind of fits over the whole thing. But then you use 6 bolts to attach the rotor onto your center lock hub, and it kind of sandwiches everything together. It's super, super secure. It's quite small. It's quite light, actually, and it's neat for a lot of reasons. People should go check out the gallery that's on escapecollective.cc right now to check out what this thing actually looks like. But one thing that's cool is this stainless steel part. That is what actually takes the load now as far as how the rotor is attached. So if you want to be super fancy, you can go with lighter weight bolts now, since those bolts are no longer They no longer do anything aside from just keep the rotor from falling off. Like when you're braking, those bolts really don't do anything anymore at this point. Project 321 is only selling them with their own hubs at this point, just to guarantee some dimensional tolerances and compatibility and that sort of thing. But pretty cool little widget. They kind of gave me a sneak peek of these a while ago, and it was good to see those in person. And yeah, kind of limited niche appeal, but people were definitely talking about them.
Yeah, I think it's cool. Like it's obviously one hub shell to do both styles of rotors, whereas pretty much every other high-end hub manufacturer has to make multiple hub shells. They offer a center lock and 6-bolt as separate products. And then you think about all the colors they have to offer and all the axle standards. It's a lot of products. I mean, this kind of halves that count. And I guess the skeptical view is that would save them money. But from my point of view, I just think it's a very clean option that just seems to keep your options open as a user, that you can run seemingly, from what I've seen of it, you can run either center lock or 6-bolt without any downside. So
I just don't understand people's opposition to center lock in the first place.
I don't think people are necessarily opposed to it, but like I said,
talking about less colors
people
and
are
stuff,
opposed to it.
People are so opposed to it, though, and I don't understand. Like, Chris King had to bring 6-back bolt because so many people got upset on the internet, and I don't... Like, what's wrong with the center lock rotor?
Well, I don't think there's anything wrong with the center lock rotor.
But people think there is.
But I think there's not enough. I think there aren't enough people who even understand that you can put a 6-bolt rotor onto a center lock hub.
But I don't even understand why you'd want to do that. Just run a center lock rotor.
Well, but I mean, it's like I said earlier. I think a lot of rotors.
Like what? What rotor?
I think like Swiss Stop, if I remember correctly, I don't think that comes in center lock.
They do, at least for the road. I know that.
Hayes, I don't think makes a center lock option.
That's like 5 customers out there.
What do you mean? Like half of my Tuesday crew runs center lock, runs a Hayes brakes at this
because
point.
They're your friends, and you told them that these brakes are good.
But they are.
But like the general public.
That's not the point. That's not the point. Quit being argumentative.
But I'm just saying, there's like, if everything was center lock hubs, Hayes could make a center lock rotor.
That is true, but they cost more.
The big issue with center lock, in my experience, is that if it does come loose on a trail, which can happen, does happen, have seen it, you can't really fix it while you're on the trail because you need a cassette lock ring tool or you need a bottom bracket tool to fix it, and most people don't carry that.
Make sure your stuff is tight enough.
But that's the issue: is that a multi tool can fix a 6-bolt rotor. But if a center lock rotor comes loose because you've under-torqued it and you haven't torqued it up to 40 Newton meters, which is actually a lot more than most people realize, then you have this issue that you can't really fix, and then you hear your rotor rattling down the trail.
That's not a center lock issue. That's a people and their lack of bike maintenance issue.
No, but I think that's what's led to center lock having so much hatred in the Pink Bike comments, is that these people,
because people
don't use a torque wrench and are doing their rotors up to 20 Newton meters instead of 40 Newton meters and having them come undone. And I think that's part of the issue.
I just don't. That seems like a silly excuse. The center lock's so much better in every other way.
Grumpy old hater has entered
the
chat.
That's like center lock is a newer thing. I'm not. If I was old, I would be telling you, give me 4-bolt. Like
4-bolt, yes. I guess bring back Coda.
there are other things there. Like it's much cheaper to just have a stamped 6-bolt rotor, whereas center lock inherently needs a spider and the carrier, and it builds in costs. So I mean, there's people at the low end where 6-bolt still to me makes more sense. Yet you see bikes, like cheap bikes, coming with tawny level center lock rotors and stupid steel lock rings, and it's just heavier without any benefit. So I think
Strata.
Yeah,
but that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about Project 321 hubs.
No, we're talking about Project 321 hubs, which cost more than that.
Like I understand on the low end, like a stamped steel rotor should exist for low end bikes,
but yeah, I think there's a few factors here as to why people hate center lock for some reason. But yeah, I think fundamentally it's going back to the Project 321, them offering both without any obvious disadvantage seems to be the way to go.
Zach, I didn't realize this was such a...
I just don't understand. Like, you read the comments and people get so upset about, like, someone introduced a new center lock hub and people just yell at it. And I'm like,
that is true. That's very true.
It's so much better and easier to work on and easier to replace a rotor and easier to travel with and easier to do everything. And you don't have to sit there with a very poorly made T25 bolt that's probably going to round out because you have a bad tool. Like...
It takes you more than 6 times as long to install or remove.
Yeah.
I'm not arguing with you on that one.
Yeah, it always
saying.
blows my mind at people's hatred of the center lock rotor.
Fair.
Yeah.
The hatred of the center lock design, I would say, is not grounded in a good functional argument.
Yeah. For the record, I prefer center lock. And to overcome the 6-bolt issue, I keep a Milwaukee 12-volt impact gun with a T25 bit in it, just ready to go full time. That's my set. That's my 6-bolt.
If you install a 6-bolt rotor without a drill, then you're doing it wrong.
Yeah,
that's true.
Yeah,
that's true.
So anyway,
right, moving on.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's enough Sea Otter stuff for now. We can end on that happy note. But please head over to escapecollective.cc. By the time you hear this podcast, there will be 3 galleries that have been up on the site, and there will still be a couple more to come before I wrap up.
That's a lot of
photos. Yeah. Well, as far as I know, I don't think we have a corrections corner to talk about on this week's show. But do either of you have anything on your mind at this point that something on your mind that may be over the head of your family?
No, just the love-hate relationship of center lock rotors for me. But I think we've covered that enough. So
yeah.
Zach, what are you working on?
Not really. In the stand right now. Oh, yeah.
He's got a beautiful bike in the stand right now.
Yeah, it's really nice. It's a Sarto with super record EPS and lightweights and SRM and ceramic speed and all of the things. It's really pretty.
What's it in?
That's really cool. The SRM.
Oh, okay.
It's not working.
Not working. Okay.
Yeah.
What is working?
But everything else.
Seemingly everything else. It is a beautiful bike.
Especially in the light too, the carbon weave, it has this like green tinted something interwoven with it. It's really good.
Yum.
Yeah.
It's not aero though, Zach. How does it go?
But the cables are hidden, so it's half aero.
How do you fix an SRM?
You mail it to Colorado Springs.
Okay.
And they fix it.
Still send it back. Okay.
Yep.
Same as usual.
All right.
Yeah.
I do have something on my mind, but I think at this point we're running a little long in the show, so I think I'd rather just sort of skip to a PSA if you don't mind.
Okay. All right. I don't mind.
Okay. Well, just to wrap up this week's show, I do have a PSA that I've been saving for a couple weeks now, and it's related to daytime running lights. Because here in the U.S., certainly here in Boulder, I've been seeing an awful lot more people running rear flashers on their bikes on the road, which I think is a nice little trend for visibility and safety and that sort of thing. However, I would like to point out that I think far too many people who are running DRLs have absolutely no concept as to how dim the one that they have is. Because I kind of make a point of, when I'm out riding this one stretch of road in particular, is Zach just heading up 36 north out of town. It's like you've got sight lines for days. So you can often see if someone's got a good DRL, you can see them from just way, way off in the distance. But if you don't, I've literally been within like 5 bike lengths of someone and only just then noticed that they had a DRL on their bike. That is not a good one. So I would just like to tell people out there, just as a little safety warning here. If you think you have a good DRL, or if you don't really know if your daytime running light is good, your rear flasher specifically, just turn it on, set it somewhere where you can see it, and then set it somewhere where you can kind of walk away from it a fair distance, and just keep looking at it. And if it is not piercingly bright when you are, I don't know, let's say 100, 200 paces, maybe ideally more, then it's probably not doing what you think you're doing, and you should probably get rid of it and get something good.
I see a lot of like really cheap Amazon ones on people's bikes, and they are not good.
They're useless. If anything, they just offer a false sense of security.
So what is good? What do you use?
There are a bunch of good ones that are out there now. My go-to is still a Bontrager Flare.
Ditto.
I feel like they've got really good flashing patterns and brightness and that sort of thing. I'm using a Garmin Varia a lot more often these days, at least on the road. And that one, the DRL is not as bright, but it does offer that radar feature, which, to me, I feel like kind of makes up for that in a lot of ways. Night Rider makes some good stuff. Exposure makes some good ones. Who else makes good ones? There's a bunch of them. Like, Planet Cycling even makes a pretty good one. There are lots and lots of good options. Some of the design ones have been pretty good as well.
Yeah.
There are lots and lots of good options, but there are seemingly far, far more bad options and it drives me crazy.
Yep. Zach, you also use a Bontrager flare?
Correct.
Yeah.
So I would say like the fact that the three of us all use the same blinky light is probably a good review of the product.
Yeah, I use that or I can't even remember the name of it, but the Lezine, top end Lezine flashy things.
Those are piercingly bright.
Yeah, those are sort of the ones I jump between. And both have been pretty reliable for me. Unlike the Nog Cobbler? I don't know what they're called.
A lot of Nog stuff I feel like is kind of hit or miss.
Yeah, it was a cool design, like a wraparound design, and sort of curved back and really bright, really, really great design. But unfortunately, I've broken two of them now, so they're off my list.
All right. Well, in any event, that is my public service announcement for this week's episode. Just check your rear DRL and just actually make sure that it is doing what you think it's doing, because there's a good chance that it's not. All right. Well, with that'll be the end of this week's episode of Geek Warning. If you aren't already a member of Escape Collective, please head over to escapecollective.cc and become one. It is how we fund all this stuff. It's how we fund everything on the site right now. It's how we all get paid and that sort of thing. But as far as the podcast goes, as far as Geek Warning goes, if you haven't already done so, please head over to iTunes and give us a rating and review, because that actually helps us quite a bit as far as people finding the show. And certainly tell all your buddies about Geek Warning, because we like having more geeks to talk to.
Yeah, find the person in your cycling group with the clean chain and tell them about us. They'll appreciate it. Also, find the person with the dirtiest chain and tell them about us. That'll also work. But I have a feeling they may not stick around in terms of listening. But who knows? Maybe we can convert them to being a clean chain rider.
Maybe. One can hope. All right. Well, with that, thanks again for listening. We will see you next week. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Cheers.